Morning. Leah and I enjoy audiobooks. Unabridged. They've got to be unabridged because it's not right to edit audio recordings and make you think you've heard the story when you haven't. But we enjoy audiobooks. I've always liked them because they allow me to listen to a book and do something else at the same time. So, if it takes you 8 hours to read a book and it takes you 4 hours to do your yard work, and you can put the book on with headphones and do it, you're halfway through the book and got your yard work done instead of, one or the other. It's also handy on trips and things like that. Now, as most of you know, I love sports. My wife does not, unless her grandson is playing. And I try very hard not to make her a sports widow or to make her have to suffer and endure watching stuff she hates. So from time to time, we'll put on an audiobook, listen to it together, because that way we get to share the book. That's another good thing about audiobooks, because you can enjoy them at the same time. And I'll put a game or something on and put the volume down on the game because I don't need the commentator. And we'll listen to the book together. Yes. Yesterday was one of those days. I recently introduced Leah to a fantasy series that, in my opinion, is actually one I enjoy more than The Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to go into it right now, but it's old. It's a classic. And we're on book 2. I found out that Leah had not read these books. And I was like, ooh, I get to introduce you. And we can enjoy them together. And book 2 is like really, really old, like 1985 old. It's so last century. But we listened to a little bit more of the book. It's a long book, and we listened to a little bit more of it yesterday. Well, at one point, I had 4 different sporting events going at once with split screens and multiple devices, and I'm watching tennis and boxing and baseball all at once, and we're listening to the book together. All that to say that it was a time of fellowship and a time of communion and a time of closeness, and we enjoyed our time together. But I was thinking about a particular scene in the book we were listening to where the main characters, the questing group, because if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, pretty much all fantasy stories are like that. There's a group and there's a mission, a quest, something you're looking for. They wound up in a situation that was, I will say, dreamlike. It was supposedly a dream, but it wasn't a dream. It was real enough that pleasure was pleasure, pain was pain, and you could really die. Because if you lost sight of the fact that this wasn't as real as it seemed, that was it. If you couldn't get behind it, you could either die in there or you could be stuck forever, just unable to escape the illusion that wasn't just an illusion. Because I'm sorry, if it can make you bleed, it's not just an illusion. Well, somebody had to go in there with them who knew the way out and not get trapped like everybody else. And there was a high price to pay to break the spell and escape. I'm not going to go into that too much because, there's at least one person here who hasn't heard it, and I'm not trying to spoil anything. But it did make me think, this world is not as real as we think it is. Now, I'm not saying this isn't reality. I'm just saying it's not primary reality. It's not the real. It's the temporary real. Pain is real. Death is real. Joy is real. But if we get stuck thinking that all we sense and all we feel and all we see around us, that this is it, we'll get trapped here on this side and defeated, unable to escape, unable to do anything productive, unable to reach the main goals, to fulfill the quest, the purpose for which we were created. But God knew the danger of that, and he knew how to set it right. He wrapped himself in flesh, and he came down here and walked into this with us, for us. And that great price that had to be paid to see that, as real as this is, there was something more real and something more lasting that we could get to, that we could live and not die. The price for that was one we could never pay, one we would never be qualified to attempt to pay, really. But he paid it for us on our behalf, whether we appreciated it or not, knowing we could never earn it, never deserve it. And it was a high, high price. He paid it. And because of that, we see what he did for us. We know he loves us. Because if we're honest with ourselves, if we're honest, we know we're not good enough to deserve somebody to die for us. Especially someone who's not like a parent. That would maybe be the closest thing. By nature of my birth, you have to die in my place. Whatever. That may not even be even remotely true anymore. I mean, the idea of sacrificing your life for your children is kind of as extinct as $1.25 gallon gas. Somewhere around the same time period, probably. We don't deserve it, but he did it. And when we see it, we realize how much he loved us and the price he paid. We can fix our eyes on that moment and know that there is an eternal. There is something beyond this. And this just kind of becomes less and less. It's not that things don't still hurt or feel good. It's not that there's not still victory and defeat. Even on this side, the physical aspects of this body, we're all going to die. Sorry if that's a spoiler for you. But this is not the end. This is not as real as it gets. Sometimes things start happening and people go, oh, well, now it's getting real. Well, it feels that way sometimes. But no matter how real it has ever felt here, it is not going to be even remotely as real as when you close your eyes on this side of eternity and open them on the other and see his face. That's going to be real. That's as real as it gets. And we can see his face, know his love, be embraced by life. Or we can see his face and for the first time ever really and truly know what it is to know dread. because we can stand clean before God having had someone else pay the bill. Or we can stand unclean before God with the bill in our hands and our spiritual wallet empty, knowing there ain't no dine and dash in heaven. He did it because we can't. And he gave it to us so we don't have to earn it, so we don't have to deserve it. But the price was heavy. The price was high. The Son of God had to die so that we could live. Not a quick, easy death. Beaten until he was unrecognizable. And then hung by nails to his hands and feet, wrists and ankles, whatever, until the weight of his body suffocated him. And the weight of my sin and your sin crushed his spirit. But that death and that crushed aspect didn't last, because he didn't stay dead. He conquered even death. The one thing we all know is that none of us are getting out of this alive. He did. He conquered death because he rose and he lives. And the most real thing today, more real than these wooden pews, more real than the fact that it's going to be 150,000 degrees today, evidently, is on the surface of the sun, it's a lot hotter than that. He loves us, and he's alive, and we can have a relationship with him because of what he did on our behalf by entering into this realm for us so that we could go out of it without harm, without danger, and without death. When we remember that, it makes it a whole lot easier to appreciate the path he led so that we can follow him and do what he did and do what he wants us to do, instead of following the illusion off the cliff.